Hey, everybody. I am really excited to share this interview with the great Anna Aurilio with you. Just have to let you know that we had some kind of a technical malfunction, and throughout the interview, after 8 minutes, my audio is out of sync with my video. So it's a little disorienting to watch. You may just want to close your eyes and listen, or just do audio only. Um, if you normally watch this on YouTube. Otherwise, you might notice that my voice is a little distant sounding, but it's a great interview, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, thanks.
I think first and foremost, we need to present people with credible solutions to their problems. So, there's five areas right now that are driving the affordability crisis. Housing and healthcare are usually tied for number one. Childcare is outrageous. I mean, you and I, our kids are older, but I don't even know how young families do it now with the cost of childcare. You've got food and you've got electric utilities. And that's another example of where you and I did so much work, right, to drive down the cost of clean renewable energy. And now it's cheaper. And now Trump is making electricity more expensive by killing the cheaper clean energy projects and trying to force states to keep the dirty, expensive ones going. So anyway, it's all topsy-turvy. And I do think making sure that we have clear solutions and clear diagnoses of the problems is a really important first step. Making sure that we have a credible path forward and that there's some unity in every moment of every day, that our side can demonstrate what they can deliver.
Hello, and welcome back to the Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy campaigns with the people who design and execute them, unpacking how they think, how they plan, and how they win. I'm your host, Pete Altman, and today we're talking to Anna Aurilio, the Senior Director of Campaigns at the Economic Security Project, where she runs advocacy campaigns to turn big ideas to improve people's lives into federal action. Anna has fought for the public interest for nearly 3 decades as the D.C. Director for Environment America, and prior to that, as the Legislative Director for U.S. PIRG. Anna led a team of advocates and mobilized grassroots members and state networks to win policies to cut pollution, protect public lands, and boost renewable energy and auto fuel economy. Anna is on the board of directors of Voices for Progress and the National Environmental Law Center. Before we dive in, if you find conversations like this useful, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps more people to find the show. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment with suggestions about, hey, who else should I interview? Or what questions should I be asking people? Or whatever else is on your mind. All right, let's get into it. Anna, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. That's what it is. It's a podcast.
Happy Friday, Pete. And I'm realizing that description was from some years ago. So I think I'm now up to almost 40 years of doing progressive advocacy.
Oh, okay. You want me to redo it?
I just have to update my bio, I think.
I should have asked. It's funny because I was also thinking, holy crap, we met almost 30 years ago. Exactly, because it was at a March. Was it March? I don't know. I think it was 1997, an Energy Foundation convening of grantees in Colorado.
My goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about that.
Wow. Yeah. Very long time ago. Wow. Well, so 30 or 40 years, whatever. How did you get into this work? And what experiences have most shaped how you think about political power?
Boy, I was just telling someone about this, that my dad is a Italian immigrant, and we had a family dinner was religious to us, right? And I think really I got started because every single night at dinner, me and my dad would get into some loud, boisterous argument about any issue whatsoever. So I sort of cut my teeth at a very young age every single night over spaghetti.
Yep.
doing about anything. And then I lived in high school. I lived in a town called Woburn, Massachusetts. And Woburn became infamous because kids were getting sick with leukemia, and their parents were in the waiting rooms of the hospitals waiting to get them treated and realized that they were neighbors. And a local Episcopalian priest, the Reverend Bruce Young, started canvassing the neighborhood to find out, like, why were these neighbors getting sick? And they soon figured out that there was a municipal drinking water well that was heavily contaminated by trichloroethylene, and that several companies, W.R. Grace, Beatrice Foods, Unifer, were in an industrial park, and on the other side of the chain link fence was our town's drinking water well, and these kids were getting sick from drinking the water. So that was a real eye opener, because in high school, I was busy trying to do many, many other things. But we were told not to drink the water. One of my friends was losing all her hair because she was undergoing treatment. Several kids were sick. At least a couple died. And this became a very famous environmental pollution case in the very early 80s. A lawyer, Jan Slickman, wrote a book, A Civil Action. It became a movie starring John Travolta. So this was one of the first cases where people blamed environmental exposure for people getting sick, and that there were real consequences for corporate misbehavior. So that was my high school years, and it existed at the back of my mind mostly because of how I experienced it, right? I had no idea there was this other litigation or the groundbreaking nature of the case that was being brought. And I like big challenges. So when I went to UMass, I studied physics because it was the hardest class I was taking. And when I graduated in 86, the only jobs that were available were like building missile guidance systems for Star Wars. And I really didn't want to like blow up the world, right? I wanted to use science for good in my altruistic college educated mind now. So I answered an ad in the paper to work for a group called the Public Interest Research Groups. And they were looking for someone to help investigate water pollution cases and work with a team of lawyers to help bring citizen suits under the Clean Water Act to make sure that corporations weren't putting too much pollution in the water. So that was my sort of very first job, and it was amazing and intense. And also really eye-opening because, the Clean Water Act had been in effect for several decades by that time. Companies, if you're going to discharge, you have to have a permit. You have to measure every month. You have to report your effluent under penalty of perjury. It has to be signed. And yet I would walk into any EPA office in the country and I would find, and this was in the days when most things were not electronic, so I'd go through physical files, and I would find major corporations with, just years of complete violations of their pollution limitations, right? Very toxic chemicals, organic chemicals. So it was really shocking to me that here's the government, they've set the permit limits, and then there's no consequence for violating it.
Yeah.
And so, me and our hardy team of lawyers, we'd get in there against the corporate lawyers and try to get the company to clean up its act, go to court if necessary. And so that was my very first job. And, it was the intersection of science and regulation. And I quickly decided that I wanted to learn more about science of pollution and, what happens in the environment. So I went to MIT, which happened to be studying my old hometown of Woburn. So I got to study the watershed and how pollution was moving through the watershed. There was, old historic pollution from tanneries, arsenic. There was the more recent pollution from the companies dumping solvents. So that was also a real eye opener too, right? Which is, once you put stuff into the environment, it's going to hit living things and unfortunately humans too. And we really needed better protections to keep people safe from all this. So after I graduated, I decided, okay, well, I better go to where the decision makers are and, give them a piece of my mind. So I was hired back into the PIRGs, and I was hired as the energy advocate at US PIRG. So I came to DC in 1993 and that's how I got my start doing advocacy in DC, and I've been here ever since.
Um, what a story, and what a way to get grounded in the idea that we can't just have laws on the books and expect them to work, but often it takes additional effort in order to make sure they're actually enforced. And the need for activism and advocacy. What a way to get into the advocacy world and and bring your science and physics background into it as well. Very cool. So we're doing stressful work, thinking a lot about politics and how to make change and having to pay a lot of attention to what the president and Congress are up to. It's stressful. How do you unwind and keep your balance?
Yeah. I'm an environmentalist. I work on economic issues now, but when I was going to grad school, I didn't live very close to any public transportation, but I was only about 2.5 miles away from the MIT lab where I was doing most of my work. And I decided, well, I should bike. And this was in 1990. I should ride a bike through Boston to MIT. No bike lanes, no bikers were considered, just annoyances. And one of my dad's
And Boston
friends,
drivers have a reputation for being really
exactly. And one of my dad's
holy.
friends, Gaetano, he had like a 3-speed Huffy down his cellar. So he's like, hey, you can use this bike. And of course, I had a helmet. So I started being a bike commuter in 1990. And, at first it was because it was the fastest way to get to my lab and to my classes and very convenient. And when I moved to DC, I kept cycling through DC and I was, the crazy lady on a bicycle with all the bike couriers riding. And now DC, of course, has amazing biking infrastructure and it's just a pleasure to be a commuter. But I realized over the years that being a bike commuter is really important for my mental health. That I could leave my house and close the door and whatever was happening at home and get on the bike and ride into work and appear at work having let off whatever steam I needed to. And then similarly on the way back home, close the door at work and head home and let off whatever steam needed to be let off. Plus, obviously, again, even in DC with the great public transit, biking is still probably the quickest way to get around. And we have much better weather down here. So it's easier to bike year round. So that's my number one thing that I do is still try to get on a bike as much as I can. And unfortunately, I got to say, over the last month, I've had some shoulder issues. So I haven't been able to bike and it's been really frustrating.
Bummer. Um, so frustrating with yeah, when we have something going on that makes it hard to do the things we like to do. But I love how that biking to and from creates that sort of separation between work and the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and you get to see things. I mean, I remember the first time I saw bald eagles in DC flying over the reservoir by Howard University, right? It was just thrilling because you do environmental work. You want to be out in the environment. You get to see the things you're protecting. So it's also just, it's a great way to get around and it's a great way to see things that you probably otherwise miss.
yeah, I do love getting on the river. My wife and I are flatwater kayakers, and as a result, I've also become a birder, sort of a birder lately. And it is something just wonderful about getting out on the water. We both immediately relax as soon as we hit it. And on the Potomac, there's lots and lots of eagles and egrets and herons and all kinds of critters that are it's just great to
It it
watch and
it's such a
enjoy.
blessing, right? That we have. And let me tell you a story. When I first moved to DC in 1993, I used to ride my bike down the Mount Vernon Trail. It's about 22 miles long. It goes along the Potomac River. And it's a great ride. And every once in a while, you would see some birders and they would be looking across the river with their spotting scopes, and they'd be seeing one bald eagle across the river. But it was quite rare. Like most weekends, I would actually go out on that trail then. And then over the years, um, there were more and more eagles. And now, the last couple of times I've done the Mount Vernon Trail, there's probably 5 bald eagle nests on the DC side of the river. And so this tells you regulation works, right? We banned DDT and it's taken decades, but the bald eagle population has come back even right in the nation's capital, heading out to Mount Vernon. It's the most stark thing. It's so cool.
It's awesome.
Where do you put in
They
on your
are.
kayak?
Um, let's see, Seneca Creek, where Riley's Lock is.
Hmm.
Sometimes at Violet's Lock, and then we've also paddled up the Monocacy and up further the Potomac, upstream around Brunswick,
Cool.
and then we've also paddled around Assateague and done other coastal estuary stuff. It's amazing. I can never remember the name of the place where it's a saltwater estuary, and it creates fabulous breeding grounds for red shoulder. Oh, good grief! What are they called? No, I can't remember. Anyway,
Where is
little
it?
black birds with red shoulders.
The red-winged
It's in Virginia.
blackbirds. Yeah, red-winged
Red-winged
blackbirds.
blackbird, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
Not that hard to deduce from the description. Thank you.
Well, I'm a
Anyway,
birder too, so
this is a place where when they all move up at the same time, it just darkens the sky. There's thousands and thousands of them. It's incredible. And then herons there too that like to park in the trees, which is always kind of a funny sight.
yeah, it's awesome. And the female red-winged blackbirds look nothing like the males. And every single spring when they come back, I'm fooled by them. I see this bird, it's kind of bigger than a sparrow, kind of stripy, and I'm like, what is that? What is that? And it usually takes me a little bit to remember, oh yeah, it's those tricky female red-winged blackbirds that look nothing like the males that's setting out to fool me once again.
Mm. I can whip out a science term, sexual dimorphism.
Whoa, there you
But
go.
I didn't know that they look different. I guess I've been looking at one or the other's sex, which they both have red shoulder stripes, right?
Nope, nope. The males are
No.
the black ones with the red and yellow shoulder stripes. And again, the females look like just sort of a giant sparrow or sort of house finch. They're sort of different shades of brown, and they're just very different looking. If they were side by
Interesting.
side, you're like, oh, that seems very strange. But yes, very dimorphic.
Well, yeah. Well, we see that in must be in other species. Cardinals for sure. Like
Mhm.
the female cardinals, very brownish.
Yep, yep,
The
exactly.
males are the red ones.
Yeah. Whereas the great blue herons, they look alike. You really can't tell a male from a female. It's very hard to tell. So it's like all different or ospreys or bald eagles. I think the raptors, like the bald eagles and the ospreys, the female is usually a bit bigger. But
Yeah, yeah. But otherwise, they look the same.
yeah, exactly. But birds are a good thing and they're a harbinger.
Yeah, they are. Um, well, I mostly know you from U.S. Perg and Environment America. And now you're with, well, you've been with for a while, Economic Security Project. So talk a little bit about what ESP is and your role there.
Yeah, so I said, I studied physics because I like challenges. It was my hardest class. I worked at the PERGs and, we were taking on big environmental problems there, climate change, toxic pollution. And economic security project is based on the theory that everyone deserves the freedom and stability that they need to thrive. We need to build economic power for everybody. And our North Star is to create a guaranteed income, right? In the richest country in the world, no one should live in poverty. We should have a guaranteed income, a floor below which no one falls, right? Not everybody needs a guaranteed income, but when you do, you should get it. No one should go hungry. And so, a big part of what I do is take that big idea and try to translate it into federal progress. What what can we do at the federal level? And it turns out I started in 2018, and we worked on expanding tax credits, like the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. Then the pandemic hit, and people really needed cash. So we worked a lot on the stimulus checks. We tried to get as many stimulus checks out the door as possible. We tried to make sure that they reached people, especially the lowest income people. We tried to make sure that people that don't usually file taxes would have access to those checks as well. And also looked at making sure, for example, that we weren't excluding immigrants, for example, right? Everyone in this country was having a hard time. And then coming out of the pandemic, into the Biden years, we helped pass and enact a really dramatic expansion of the child tax credit. So we took something that had been, helpful for families, but really excluded millions and millions of children, low-income families whose parents didn't make enough money to get the child tax credits. We made it fully available to all low-income kids. We made it monthly. We expanded it. So the average family in the United States in 2021 was getting about $444 a month if they had children under the age of 18. And again, we made sure that people who didn't usually file taxes, there was a way for them to get it that would be quick and easy. We did a lot of work about getting the word out. And that cut child poverty in half. And, when you think about big problems in the world and the big problems that you and I have worked on, a lot of them defy solutions. But poverty is not one of them, right? And this was a real lesson of, we know how to solve child poverty. We do. We did it. For 6 months, we did it. And then sadly, every single Republican in Congress, and sadly, Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, which had 50,000 kids lifted out of poverty by the child tax credit, they absolutely refused to make it go on any longer. And so that was really such a disappointment, but we know how to do it. And then what we did at ESP is we worked with state groups and we worked at the state level. So governors were really interested, having seen the success of the federal child tax credit expansion. And so we doubled the number of states that had child tax credits, and those are still in place. And, we know we've got bills in Congress that have almost every single Democrat in Congress supports that type of expansion, and we're going to try to move it again when we have more political power. So that was a really important time and a really important victory, and also unbelievably disappointing that people couldn't see the power of this, and to understand the impact that poverty has on kids' lives and the stress that families go through. And being able to alleviate that and being incapable of continuing that success it was a really disappointing time.
It makes a lifetime of difference.
It really does. And, we started looking at, and we're a group that has also done a lot of guaranteed income work. There are more than 150 guaranteed income pilots around the country. So 50 to 60,000 people are getting some sort of monthly unconditional cash. Again, giving people the freedom and stability they need to thrive. Yeah. And what we find is, obviously it stabilizes a family's finances, right? Because especially if you get it monthly, you get it when the bills are due, right? So all of a sudden you're not falling behind on the electric bill or the water bill or the rent. And as we all know, it's very expensive to be poor, right? If you fall behind on one of your bills, you got to pay extra to get the utilities turned back on. That's no good, right? And then if you need money to be loaned in advance, and this is from my consumer work at the PERGs, I know, the payday lenders are out there willing to dig very deep in your pocket and charge outrageous interest fees, and credit cards do that too. So every step of the way, when you fall behind financially, the hole that you dig just gets harder and harder to come out of. So number one, what guaranteed income or expanded child tax credits do is it just helps stabilize your finances. And when so many people in the United States now are part of the gig economy, where from one month to the next, you don't know what your income might be, right? It also helps to smooth it a little bit. It helps people's health. right? So they're more able to afford to go to the doctor. Long-term job prospects. A lot of people like, oh, if you give someone, $500 a month, they're going to quit their jobs. I don't know about you, Pete, but I couldn't quit my job for $500 a month. Like that just makes no sense. What it did do is it helped people find better jobs, right? Because you could take a day off from work and go interview, or you could also fix your car or get
Right.
transportation to something else. So all of
Yep.
these things are lessons that we know and that we've learned about the power of cash in people's lives, and then less tangible things. Number one is stress. So I don't know if you've ever laid awake at night wondering how you're going to pay a bill, but back in the day, I remember this was years ago, my hot water heater broke and I had no money. And I was just laying in bed all night long thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't know how I'm going to fix this. And I think I went without hot water for a while, is what I did. Um, but it's incredibly stressful. And that has a physical toll on people too, and a toll on families' well-being. And then the last thing I'll say is it's also not just expensive to be poor, but also it is incredibly time consuming, right?
Yeah.
So most people who get guaranteed income, most low income people who get public benefits, not only are they working, but they're working two or three jobs. And one of the things we did follow-up interviews with some of the people in Stockton, California that were part of one of the first guaranteed income pilots. And they told us about the sort of basically what we started calling time poverty. And that when they were
Yeah.
getting $500 a month, that meant they were able to actually maybe drop a shift on Saturday and take their kids to the park or spend time with their kids and help them do homework in the evening. So all of these things where you take some of this stuff for granted and then you realize, no, it just gives people, it's more than a check. It gives people some breathing room. And that's very powerful. So that's a big part of what we do is we look for ways, how can we get cash back into the pocket of people who need it the most? And then on the other
Mhm.
side, who is taking that money out and keeping people from getting ahead financially? So we look a lot at corporate power, concentrated corporate power, monopoly power. We're doing a lot of work looking at AI, because if there's ever a definition of concentrated corporate power, it's the fact that, the there's about 8 companies in the world
Yeah.
that are big enough to be able to run these large language models and have the computing power. And there's about one company in the world that makes the super fast chips and Nvidia. So that is a place where, decisions about a very powerful new technology are being made by a very few people.
There is a lot to unpack there, and you have foreshadowed several of the things I wanted to ask about. I have one uh, question just to satisfy my curiosity. How does basic universal income work? Like, if when you propose it at the federal level?
Yeah. So first there's several things to unpack. One of the things that I want to be clear about is we work towards a basic income, so not a universal income. Again,
Got it.
our notion is we want to create a floor so that people can't fall into poverty. But once you're doing fine, you don't need a guaranteed income, right? This is really should be a floor. So how it would work, and that I'll just use the expanded child tax credit as the example, is that you would say, okay, within some amount of the federal poverty level, say 2 or 3 times the federal poverty level. Anybody that is below that, so they're in danger of getting below the poverty level, not able to stay ahead. And we can talk more about the current affordability crisis that's being accelerated by Republicans' massive cuts to healthcare and food programs to fund tax breaks to billionaires. But it is hard for people to get ahead right now financially. So if you're making, you know, less than about 400% of federal poverty level, you would get a monthly stipend. And the idea is it is unconditional, no strings attached. We think that people are capable of making their own decisions and setting their own priorities. And again, when we've looked at guaranteed income pilots around the country or the expanded child tax credit, where 65 million families got it for 6 months, people made really good decisions. Most of that money went towards the necessities: rent, food, utilities. There was a Brookings Institute Appalachian State study that looked at it, and they found, very little evidence of expenditure on things like alcohol or cigarettes, right? It was really
Yeah.
the basics, which tells you something
All the
about.
things the Republicans like to say the money will be used for.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's how it would work, right? And you could do it a number of ways. You could expand the existing tax credits, the child tax credit for people with children, the earned income tax credit for people without, right? We already have that ability, and IRS proved that it's capable of sending out monthly checks to people. That process actually went really, really smoothly. Despite people, worried, how are we ever going to send out monthly checks? They did. You could do it that way. There's also an idea called a negative income tax. So people making below a certain level um, would get monthly cash, and people making above a certain level keep paying the taxes, and that would help lift everybody up. So that was actually an idea during the Nixon times, that was really under serious consideration by Republicans. So this idea has been around for a while. We proved it with the pilot programs around the country. We proved it with a child tax credit, and even the stimulus checks. Right, there were 3 rounds of stimulus checks that went out, and
Yep.
it kept families afloat.
So I'm curious about what are the obstacles? What are the arguments you hear? I assume that at some level, um, members of Congress would prefer to give more tax breaks to Jeff Bezos, et cetera, rather than breaks to working families, because Bezos is the one who writes the campaign contributions. I mean, is it that? Is it philosophical opposition to the idea of handouts? What's going on that makes it so hard to get this in place?
Yeah, so I think we've come a long way. And I think, again, the lessons of the pandemic, the stimulus checks, the expanded child tax credits, the states that now have, bigger child tax credits or earned income tax credits, there's real data and evidence of how helpful and useful this is. And I think, unfortunately, there is some philosophical resistance, especially in the Republican mindset that says, this is just a handout and people will quit their jobs. And it's just not borne out by the data. And in fact, that the data is often the opposite. Like we said, when people actually studied what happened, there was some people did leave their jobs, right? Because if you're a 2-family household and you can afford to have someone stay home because the average cost of childcare in the United States is now more than $12,000 a year, that might actually make financial sense. But now you're not paying for childcare, right? But as many people also worked more as a result, right? Because they were able to either, have that last little bit that they needed to cover the childcare, or to fix their car so they could get to work, or, get some job training so that they could get a better job or get a full-time job or have time to interview. So that, I think, is really a myth, that people are just going to quit their jobs en masse. And I think that's the biggest one, right? And I think there's a real distrust of low-income people. There's definitely some racism involved as well, right? Anything that is going to disproportionately benefit Black or brown people, there are some folks that just don't want to support that, and that it's a crying shame, and it's actually all too obvious when you start having conversations with some of these decision makers, and that's really a shame. So those are the kind of obstacles, and I'll tell you, we just went through this debate, right? In 2025, Republicans controlled all 3 branches of government, and they passed a bill called H.R. 1. The president called it the One Big Beautiful Act. And for any of the billionaires standing on the inauguration dais behind President Trump, it was a big, beautiful act. What that bill does is it cuts $1 trillion from Medicaid, from food programs, and hands it over to corporations and wealthy people and ICE. So what we are now seeing around the country is people are losing healthcare coverage. First, because they did not extend the tax credits for the Affordable Care Act that were in place. So 24 million people starting this year saw their premiums, if they were on the Affordable Care Act, at some cases double or triple their monthly premiums go up by, if you're paying $300 a month now, you get a note that says you're going to pay 600 or 800, depending on how old you are and what kind of plan. So the Congressional Budget Office has estimated that as a result of this bill that hands $1 trillion to tax breaks to corporations and billionaires and funding ICE terrorizing our cities, 15 million people are going to lose health coverage over time. 15 million people. So that's bad, right? That's really bad. And that'll cost everybody, because even if you have your own private health insurance, it's going to make everyone's rates go up, because now people are going to get sicker. They're going to use emergency rooms as their primary care. And it's going to cost us all as a society, right? It's needless human suffering. Because the people that are getting the tax breaks, they don't need them. Jeff Bezos does not need one dime more in terms of a tax break.
No, he really doesn't.
Right? So it's a crying shame. And we did a lot of work, ESP did a lot of work during that bill to try to make the case that they should expand the child tax credit and earned income tax credit. And they expanded the child tax credit a little bit, but what they also did is, the other thing that's happening in Congress is there is such vicious hatred of immigrants fueled by President Trump's rhetoric that a lot of the provisions of the bill also went after immigrants, even if you're here legally, even if you are paying taxes, which most of them do. So, for example, for the child tax credit, there's now a requirement that even if you are a US born child, that at least one of your parents has to have a social security number or you do not get it. So that basically kicks 2.5 million children off of the child tax credit, US citizen children off the child tax credit, because one of their, both of their parents don't have social security numbers. So it's outrageous. And every single provision of that bill you can look at, and you see just disdain and cruelty for people who are just trying to get by, and massive, massive handouts to people who don't need another dime.
It's I think society has always involved tension between those, those with and those without. It definitely feels like we are seeing more and more energy going into figuring out how to take away money, resources, assets from those who make less in order to give it to the people who are making the most. And just the level of creativity involved in doing that, like the one you just gave as an example, is really extraordinary. You talked about we need to have a change in who's in the White House and a change in Congress in order to start fixing this, moving the other direction. How do you think about what we need to do to build the long-term power that will not only put the decision makers in place who will move these policies forward, but also that we can keep them? Um, like the IRA, we had it for what, a year and a half, 2 years, and then gone again. Um, so how do we build the durable power around this?
Yeah. I've been spending the last 8 years thinking about building economic power for everybody. And I do think that the political climate in this country right now is being driven by economic anxiety. And, from people who are looking at the results of the 2024 election, famously, I've heard Neera Tanden of the Center of American Progress say several times that, people were economically anxious. And when they were given a choice between what they perceived as the status quo and the wrecking ball, they chose the wrecking ball. And now we are seeing the wrecking ball. And so I think that we need to do three things. One is we need to correctly address the affordability crisis. And my organization, we have an economist, Mike Consul, and he's written a paper called the Affordability Framework. And he's basically diagnosed the affordability crisis in this country as being due to two things. One is broken incomes. People just aren't making enough money. And if you look at the costs of things over time, when I was going to college, when I was trying to buy a house, um, the cost of those things has gone up dramatically over the last 20 or 30 years, and real wages just have not caught up. And so, what you have a situation in this country now where more and more people are feeling like those things are out of reach, or if you go and get a higher education, you have so much debt that prevents you then from, building wealth going forward, right? So I think that's one thing we have to acknowledge, that incomes are broken. We need better wages. We need more money during the time of our lives when we need more money, right? When you're starting a family, you're trying to buy a house, all those kinds of things. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Things that can help there, of course, would be, guaranteed income or cash policies like the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit. And then the flip side of things is that markets are broken. So in some cases, we have very, very high corporate concentrations, for example. And, we now are seeing that companies are using technology to extract more money out of people's pockets, right? RealPage, started using AI to allow landlords to collude to raise rents. And there's now surveillance pricing, right? Where, there's data that's being collected from you every single time you log into a website or walk into a grocery store,
Right,
and the
right.
prices change. So, so we have a lot of problems like that. There's concentrated markets, right, where there's no competition. There are gatekeepers, right? So what's stopping housing from getting built, or low income housing from getting built? Let's look at who's the gatekeeper there. So those are the two basic pillars, right? Broken markets, broken incomes. That's what's
Yep.
driving the affordability crisis. And so there are a lot of solutions that can flow from that, but it's going to take leadership. And I think right now we're seeing that there are a lot of people who say that they're concerned about affordability, even though President Trump has said it's a hoax. And we need
Yep.
to have more of a movement around some big, bold solutions to problems, right? So, we need to deal with food prices. We need to deal with healthcare.
Yeah.
And of course, step number one in healthcare is going to have to be reversing the Trump cuts, right? We're going to have to reverse that $1 trillion worth of cuts. But then where do we go from there? How do we make sure that people can get guaranteed healthcare that's affordable to them? Right? That's where we have to aim towards. So, same thing with food prices. Right now you have, and you see every day in the news, like food prices are going up due to tariffs, due to anti-competitive behavior with some of the largest retailers, right? Keeping prices high and keeping competitors from accessing the same supply of food at lower cost. So there's all kinds of shenanigans that are basically keeping people down and,
Yeah.
extracting down to the last dollar of what people can afford. So two things: have the right diagnosis, and two is don't just defend and get us back to the status quo. We've got to have some bold solutions that actually solve people's problems and take us further.
Well, you're touching on one of the questions that I think is most fascinating, which is how are people and organizations thinking about what comes next? What comes after Trump? What do we want in terms of a policy agenda and how that gets implemented? Because there are problems with saying, oh, we need to rebuild what we had and restore what we've lost, what's been torn down, because in a lot of ways, those things had flaws that meant they weren't actually doing the job they were meant to do, leaving a lot of people frustrated, which is part of what led us to where we are right now. So there's a lot thinking about how do we start from where we are in order to create what we need. Are are you having those conversations, or how are you thinking about what do we want to push for? When Trump is gone, and I think it'll take a while to rinse the MAGA out of our Congress. But what do you think about those next 10 years or 20 years?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think first and foremost, we need to present people with credible solutions to their problems. So, there's 5 areas right now that are driving the affordability crisis. Housing and healthcare are usually tied for number one. Childcare
Mhm.
is outrageous. I mean, you and I, our kids are older, but I don't even know how young families do it now with the cost of childcare. You've got food and you've got electric utilities. And, and that's another example of where you and I did so much work, right, to drive down the cost of clean, renewable energy. And now it's cheaper. And now Trump is making electricity more expensive by killing the cheaper clean energy projects and trying to force states to keep the dirty, expensive ones going. So, anyway, it's all topsy turvy. And I do think making sure that we have clear solutions and clear diagnoses of the problems is a really important first step. Making sure that we have a credible path forward and that there's some unity in every moment of every day that our side can demonstrate what they can deliver. I'm so excited to see the 2 new governors of New Jersey and Virginia really tackling this issue head on, for example. Um, I think, there are some policies that are shovel ready in terms of if Democrats come back to power in the Congress. Nearly every Democrat has on a bill to expand the child tax credit and earned income tax credit. They could pass it day one, no problem. I think nearly every Democrat would be ready to reverse all the Trump healthcare cuts. So that would be just step one. And then I think there really needs to be just a unified, massive push to keep moving these solutions forward in the Congress, at the state level, and at the local level, and demonstrate to people, if you're with us, we are going to implement real solutions to your problems. That's going to give you power back and take away some of the power that has been taken from you and the money that's been taken away from you.
The challenges that we're facing, maybe one of the biggest challenges, is our media environment is really fragmented, it's siloed, um, and the right has, with a great deal of intentionality, built up a robust infrastructure to support a huge noise machine, really good at pushing out misinformation, disinformation, pure lies. Um, and that makes it hard to make a case because it's getting harder and harder to reach people. Particularly, there's a lot of Americans who don't seek the news. Sometimes it creeps in through whatever they're watching on YouTube or TikTok, and they get an inkling of it. But how are you thinking about addressing the very asymmetrical communications environment? I mean, how do you get your case out in this kind of context?
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem that and we saw this coming, right? In 2015, when Trump was running for the president, he started attacking the media and calling it fake news. And you had the,
Yeah.
rise of the right-wing media. And, at every level now we're seeing, both fewer and fewer journalists on the job. Jeff Bezos took over the Post. And now we have no sports section and no metro section,
And
you
and
know?
looks like the new news is the Ellisons are going to get control of Warner Brother and all of its
Yeah.
properties,
Yeah.
including
And
CNN, which means they'll be able to steer the news coverage just like Bezos is and just like CBS now is.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's a big problem. So I think a couple of things. One is we need to keep supporting actual investigative reporters and news outlets, right? I think it's important for people to keep doing that and look for ways to keep doing that. I think the second thing is, as you're pointing out, people often don't get their news from the newspaper anymore. It's online, it's YouTube, it's Twitter, it's Instagram. So we need to figure out how to get our stuff and our take in front of people. And I will say that my organization, Economic Security Project, has started a project over the last year. It's called Pop Economy. And we have explainers on economic issues that we put out onto the social media channels. And it's been going quite well. And it's a little bit of a mystery to me, right? Because I'm old school and I'm from back in the day when if you got something in the Washington Post front page above the fold, that was the news of the day. And I also use online news to get my news. So I think we've been getting smarter organizationally at some of the digital content and getting that out there. But I think movement wide, we've got to do a better job of reaching people.
Your colleague Natalie Foster recently wrote about what sounded to me like a really smart initiative, the Economic Futures Cohort,
Yeah.
where ESP invested in 10 creators, provided support and resources to help them start producing their own online content. I think that's exactly what we need to do at a really big scale across the left. Although maybe I should ask, is that working? How's it going?
It's going really well. And it's also, it's a good effort and we've proved the case and we're getting some very good content out of it. And then it's fascinating because a lot of these content creators are not political content creators. They're sort of lifestyle influencers. And we were doing briefings, on economic issues. And what happened was we gave them a briefing on healthcare and the fact that the Republican bill, HR1, was going to, massively cut healthcare and cause the healthcare premiums under the Affordable Care Act to double and triple this year. And when we did that briefing back in the fall, a bunch of them, because they're independent contractors, right? They're self-employed. So a lot of them are on the Affordable Care Act. So it became very personal to them. It was not, it wasn't some abstract thing. They were actually seeing what was happening to their healthcare costs. So I think that's also an interesting thing, which is the affordability crisis is very relatable to so many people. And I think it's important to have people talking about it and talking about why things are so expensive, right? Why is it? Why are electric bills going up?
Right. Because it's not just the laws of nature.
No.
It's policies that people are deliberately putting in place in order to create this particular system.
Yeah, absolutely. Every step of the way.
Well, we're almost out of time, unfortunately. There's so many other things actually I wanted to ask you about, but oh well. What is a piece of advice that you got early on that was really formative for you, and or a piece of advice you want to pass on to others?
Yeah, I think I'll say two things. One is that I've done a lot of work on bipartisan issues, like expanding the child tax credit is bipartisan. We didn't succeed in doing that in a meaningful way in this bill, but there's a lot of bipartisan support. And I'll say that, look for people who share your values on an issue, even if they don't share your values on any other issue, right? But there's a whole set of people on some environmental issues, right? There are people who care, hunters and fishermen, who care very deeply about public lands. And actually, there was a provision in that big bad bill to sell off our federal lands, and that got killed by very conservative Western activists, right? So look for people who share your values and make common cause with them. That's one thing to do, and that's very, very powerful. It's hard, but you can do it, and you can make real change.
Yeah.
And then personally, I was given a great piece of advice very early when I came to DC. A friend of mine named Melanie Griffin, who had worked for the Sierra Club for many, many years. And, I came as a baby advocate and ready to go. And she said, at the end of every day, you have to think back on the change that you made that day. that it could be as little as, you got one congressional office to talk to another, or you trained your intern on how to write a good letter to send to the Hill, because victories are very few and far between. And as we're seeing, unfortunately, now with Trump, like, you can win a lot of things like cutting back on mercury from power plants only to see them reversed by a craven president who wants to deliver to his campaign contributors. So in order to keep going, you have to recognize the progress that you're making every single day. And also it helps you to check, are you spending your time in the best way so that it's actually leading to your goal? But I think that's really important. Every single day, think back on what it is that you've accomplished. And I'll say on my day, one of the things I've accomplished is talking to you and reflecting on all these lessons.
Well, I'm really happy to be part of that. That's great. And this is one of the parts of my day is getting to connect and learn more about the world of economic oriented advocacy, organizing, and solution.
Absolutely.
Anna, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I really appreciate it. It's been so much fun and so good to get to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on, Pete. Good to see you. Happy
You
Friday.
bet. And to you. Thanks for tuning into The Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy. The podcast is produced by Prismatic Strategies to share wisdom and insights from leaders in the field. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Music was written by Andrea Perry and Pete Altman. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who care about making a difference. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. Thanks again, and see you next time.